All right, kastamulira omubala ogwo Red Buffalo Soldier abamaze okuyingirawo. Red Buffalo Soldier buuza kubatulaba n'abatuwuliriza. Bakulindiridde Donsasire mbadde mu studio number 1. Ebyokwogerako binstruggle tabuse. Tugende mu maaso.
Nayanziza muganda wange Comrade Mark okunkyaza nate amanya Red Buffalo Soldier Rogers Asimwe yasalawo kweyunga kunkyukakyuka. Baniriza nnyo mwenna abaliko online home and away. Olwaleero tuze n'akapya nsonga ya struggle ng'omwanjuzi bw'agenda okitwanjuliraawo maaso awo. Go ahead, Mark.
Is Museveni the birther of political disorder? Nti Museveni ye kanaaluzaala w'obusambatuko bw'ebyobufuzi? Naye lwaki? But why? Sebo, bandula.
Today we are here to and come up with a critical analysis about the works and manifestation of the Museveni construct, Yoandise NRA, ebigendera byayo, tugezaako okufumiitiriza ensonga emabega lwaki batandikawo eyo struggle yaabwe y'Olukumi-1980 ekulembeddwa Mwami Museveni. Wano Museveni twagala mutunuuliranga omuzaalisa ye kennyini the birther of disorder, stretching back from the conceptual times of when Museveni chose to join rebellions as a way of liberating his mind and his people. Mukulu Mark namwe abatuwuliriza, it should come to your attention that Museveni to have gone to the bush, he did not conceive the idea overnight in the 1980s. That is not true. Rather, it should be clear that Museveni had decided to become a warmonger since the days of his school times. This was even testified in an interview by one of Museveni's guardians, called him Godfather, the late Boniface Byanyima, father to Winnie Byanyima, who was the host of the Museveni family when they had just moved in that area of Ankole. So the old man clearly stated that during his holiday time, Museveni consumed most of his time ng'asoma bitabo ebyaba communist and revolutionary books. Meaning that when you see Museveni and the 27 Bushmen going to Luwero to embark on a guerrilla warfare against the sitting government of then, that means Museveni had already conceived. His mind was already pregnant with an ideology of political and military engagement. You understand?
Yes.
1953, we see Museveni becoming active in organizing societal groups, and his engagement later on in Tanzania, where he was in Dar es Salaam University. He gets out of the university and goes to Southern Africa, Mozambique and Zimbabwe under the Pro-NASA chapter to go fight on behalf of the Southern African states.
Eno nalabye aba Pro-NASA babanja mbu yabasuubiza.
So basically, I'm trying to give you Jemvudde wa Museveni n'okugezaako okukubira tooki nti kino ekyeruweero, it was the finishing line of his concept. So violence is what Museveni has studied and practiced in the last 50 years of his life. Okay? So when you see people die in Luwero, about 500,000 or more, this is something Museveni had studied while in school. It is clearly known, it was brought to our attention that while at university, Museveni embarked on studying revolutionary, military, and political struggles. At that moment, while he was in school, around the 1958, there was the French-Algeria Revolution. Okay? The French-Algeria Revolution of 1958, awo Museveni wasomera ku bitabo eby'omusajja nga France Fanon, books like The Wretched Earth, which basically tells you that to decolonize yourself, you need to engage violence, if that is what it takes. So it is clear that when Museveni was doing his final papers, we are told that he wrote about his dissertation basing on the literature of Frantz Fanon. And what does it teach you? It teaches you decolonization of the mind and self through warfare and use of arms. So ebizibu byemuze mulaba Uganda wano, Museveni in a way or another, Nkulu Mark has had a hand. Recently, he has clearly come out and said that even if Idi Amin was not killing Ugandans, they had an agenda that they were supposed to pursue. This was in his recent statement. We have Virayo Nagamba, if you get in our way, we clear you, we clear you, we clear you. You cannot stop us. You cannot stop us. We crush you. So basically, to understand the Museveni mind, you have to go back and do an X-ray examination of what informs Museveni's mentality. Okay? Now, fast forward. Coming to Luwero, 1980, 5 years of Bush War, Museveni clearly knows that him being a student of Machiavelli, okay, Nicole Machiavelli, who teaches about how to become a prince, in his book, Machiavelli says that there are two types of princes or leaders. Those who are born leaders, okay, like the Kabakas and all that kind of traditional monarchists. And we also have another set of people who can become leaders through self-endeavors, call it, climbing or okusamba akaji k'ebyobukulembeze. If you are not born a prince, how do you become like president? How do you become the omnipotent control of authority? You can use violence. So Museveni, having examined his background, which did not have anything to do with direct monarchical leadership, all he decided to do was to go study about revolutions, become a military person, comprehend the concept, and come and apply. It had to take a concerted effort, which was a thin line between survival and death in Luwero, for him to emerge, okay, as a person who took over power from a sitting government. And what did he apply? He applied military means through guerrilla warfare. Basically, when you talk about war, you are not talking about a popcorn and a movie party. You are talking about death. It is no surprise that in Luwero, 500,000 skulls still lie in a state of, death up to now as a result of what was driving Museveni. So all that was a concept constructed in his mind. He was focusing at the end, using warfare, military kind of force as a means to achieving his end. So you cannot say that the confusion in Uganda between the early 80s or even during the Idi Amin days were a reason for Museveni's involvement in guerrilla warfare. It is not, because after all, 1980 there was an option of a civil, a civil way of power transition, which was manifested in the 1980 ballot paper kind of arrangement. So he alleges that because of electoral fraud, that is why he chose to take up to arms. But you cannot practice one evil, fight against it, only to end up being the master and the birther of the second disorder, which
exactly.
is political disorder. So
two wrongs do not make a correct thing.
Yes, so I have been giving you the history of Museveni, how he has been, involved in literal studies, practical studies in the Fronasa warfare, not just in his country. You'd ask yourself, if indeed Museveni was for liberating Uganda, why did he have to go to Mozambique first before coming to Uganda? It clearly tells you that he was building up forces. In the military, if you are to take over power, you need to have the competence of the commander in you, okay? Then you have to build what we call capacity. When you have capacity and when you have command and control, that is how you execute a war. Those things, that's what they will teach you in the Germany literature of warfare and strategic war management. So he went to Mozambique under Fronasa under the guise of being Pan-Africanist, yes, partly, but for the most part of it, Museveni was building capacity and he was also building alliance with the South African revolutionaries, such that when his time comes, they owed him a return of the favor in his upcoming struggle, which we now see coming up in Luwero, 1980 to 1985, a 5-year struggle that dilapidated and left the central Buganda, Ugandans at large impoverished. So you see, when you grow up poor and you need to coerce people into joining you in a military force, you have to demolish their livelihoods, okay? So that is why Museveni, when he organized his war, he had well known that to go into war, if you have 10 men, you need food to sustain them for at least 10 times, okay? If you study Sun Tzu, in his book, he tells you the importance of logistics. Even all war colleges here, in wherever you go, they tell you the importance of logistics. Efficiency of logistics is key in sustaining warfare. So Museveni used a guerrilla approach. He did not use conventional warfare. He used guerrilla approach. Why? Because he did not have a formidable force to help him execute his agenda. Guerrilla warfare teaches you that you have to coerce the community to joining you by force. That is why witnesses have been coming up from time to time telling you that they would attack us at night in Luwero, they would chop our parents with machetes and all that, kidnap some of the people, kidnap children, and force them to join them in the bush, including even looting their food and animals for survival. So if you engage in guerrilla warfare, trying to take over, an organized society and taking over the state, it is incumbent upon you. It is a must that you have to create what we call a destabilizing factor. Destabilizing factor means go start planting like landmines the way they did, rob banks, create a situation of anarchy as it was witnessed in most parts of Uganda, 1980 through 1985. So you make people feel dehumanized. So from the literature Museveni had studied in school, that is Tanzania, University of Dar es Salaam, I have told you he studied very well the conceptual aspect of Franz Fanon, which teaches you about dehumanizing society. So by breaking the economic social background and stability, especially in central Uganda, where the war theater was, call it the stage of his war, the theatric of his warfare was deliberately in Buganda because, one, Buganda had the population of a group of people. He wanted him to fight for his cause, and Buganda also was well strategic in terms of geographical positioning. It is in the middle of everything. Gulu, you can't go to Gulu without going through Luweero. You can't go to Bunyoro without going through Luweero, especially Masinda and all those areas. And it is very easy to hit, to destabilize central Buganda based in Luweero. It is strategic for you to go to Kampala after hitting people in the Luweero. It is also easy for you to cross and go to Busiro. It is also easy for you to cross using land or river Kafu, and you end up in Bunyoro. You could also move actually from Luweero Triangle and go to Choga. So all that warfare theatricals, the way it turned out, ebintu byali mu nteekateeka.
Yes, sebo.
Nga mutwe gwani oguli emabega w'ekyo?
Mwami Museveni.
Kubanga ne musiko, our uncles, ba-uncle baffe abali during the Bush War, when they came out, they said there came a time when the boys were almost giving up. So at a certain point, Museveni had to retreat and go back to Sweden. So when the boys asked Salim Saleh, Afande, sasa tutafanyaje, what shall we do? Afande told them, vumilia, mzee anapanga.
Mugumikirize mzee alina byapanga.
Aha. So that means he alina nyini concept. That's why we come out to critically analyze Museveni as a birther of political disorder in Uganda. So coming forward, after the liberation, Museveni did not just destabilize the social livelihoods of people in Uganda, because when you disintegrate family, where Jaja, father and mother are no longer in the same homestead, some have been killed, others have joined the war, children have been abducted as kadogos, the way you very well know that he did it, okay? That means you are breaking the social fiber of society. And I told you that it is very strategic to engage and succeed in guerrilla warfare. You have to destabilize an organized society like Buganda of that time. So it is the only way you can achieve your agenda. Destabilize a well set up, progressing society like Buganda, make them desperate, because rich people cannot fight for you. Okay? A stable society cannot fight for you. You have to subject them to the extremities of survival. So, using that psychological and force, they end up joining you anyway. Why? Because they get realized that whether we stay home or go to the bush and join Museveni, the other option is death. Remember, he was coming into homesteads at night, hacking them with machetes and pangas, no bukumbi, until that point where they were conditioned psychologically to thinking that the only way to survive is to join a protector in Museveni's army, the guerrillas. So that is how mentally and psychologically Museveni ended up winning the people in the central. So for as long as he gained momentum and built capacity, he was good to go to advance his fight into other areas of Uganda. Port Poto, Masaka, Gulu, Eastern, like that. So every time he used coercion and force and destabilization of stable societies, he ended up gaining capacity. So when you gain capacity and get these people under your control, you can do all you want with them. It is very easy to program the human mind for as long as you have gotten a hold of their mental circuit. So that is how Museveni ends up building a force from about 41 men in the initial stages to incorporating and absorbing some of the ex-soldiers in the previous regime, the Tito Okello, and also he had to apply propaganda and alliance with the people like the Moses Ali's, and because Moses Ali himself, he had his own militia group.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. If it was not for Moses Ali, Museveni would not have succeeded winning the audience of Gaddafi. Moses Ali, through his contacts, remember he was a minister during Amini time.
Yes.
So his contacts were very paramount in seeking audience from Gaddafi for help. That is why you see that it was very crucial for the Musevenis to disguise themselves as Muslims. When Museveni wanted the attention of Gaddafi, they had to use what we call pseudonyms. Amanya Gechiwan. Salim Saleh has never been a Muslim, but he had to adopt that name to create positive rapport. Wanga nawe kirabe nti bw'oba oli mulokole ng'oyagala kwana kawala kalokole kikukakatako okugenda mu night prayer.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Or if you have not been a practicing man of faith, you adopt. Because you know the ultimate desire is to win the attention of that person, you know. So that is how the Musevenis end up baptizing themselves pseudonyms, Amanya Gechiwan, like Chef Ali, Moses, some of them were Salim Saleh, all that is fake. Museveni himself was Kasim, you know. Yeah, that is his fake name. Okay. Shabani Bantariza, Shabani has never been a Muslim, that's fake. Wow. So when I come here to give you a critical analysis into the person of Museveni as the birther of Muzalisa wa disorder, I can tell you that it should come to your understanding that this guy conceived the idea, the ideology of where he wanted to take his people and how to manipulate Ugandans. He was the master planner of all these things that have been happening. We're tracing back from his days when he was working under Amin, when he penetrated the Obote structure by becoming a spy and State Bureau Research. He was what now is the ISO of Uganda. During the Amin time, they were called, they were spies under State Research, State Bureau Research, stuff like that. So in his regime, he baptized it to become Internal Security Organization, which is ISO. So what you see today as the NRM, political and state infrastructure, is a graduation of the brainchild in Museveni that was conceived during his days at Dar es Salaam University, but inspired by his dream to becoming a liberator of his impoverished sub-ethnic group of Ugandans, some of whom that had come to Ankole area as refugees. It is not to anybody's surprise, therefore, that we see Museveni, enlisting most refugee diehards that were in the initial grouping of the NRA, including Fred Gisha Rijema, rest in peace, including this man who is a renegade of Kagame, who is on the run now in South Africa, and another one who was killed, including Kagame himself, who was a refugee in the Toro sub-region, because that is where he went to school in primary. So you have to connect the dots. How did Museveni get to have these Rwandese young men like Gisha Fred Rijema to win their hearts and minds so they could take on this idea of becoming the stabilizers of the Uganda state that had actually hosted them, having run away from Rwanda during the 1950 genocide in Rwanda. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to bring it to your attention that when you hear about the Rwandese genocide, it did not begin just with the 1990-1994 genocide. No, there was another massive genocide earlier in the days, 1950s, that forced the parents of the Kagames and the parents of the Fred Rijema the late to flee Rwanda to seek for refuge in Uganda, and most of them were placed in refugee camps, including Nyachibare, which is deep down there in the Toro sub-region. And that is where Kagame emerges alongside Fred Gisa Rijema, and they join the NRA. Because it is very easy to use a desperate, poor person who wants self-liberation to fight fearlessly like, like a wounded lion. That is why you realize that during the Bush War, Museveni's right-handed men were Rwandese determined fighters like Gisha Rijema. Gisha Fred Rijema was as militant and fierce and determined, a very good combatant, maybe only comparable to Salim Saleh, because when it comes to practical warfare maneuvers, Museveni does not come any closer, not even an inch closer to Salim Saleh and the likes of the late Rijema. So ask yourself, how does Kagame come into play? Kagame becomes an entrusted young man to Museveni, having come from the refugee camp, joining the ranks in the forces of NRA, to the extent that Museveni could entrust no other person with the chieftaincy of military intelligence apart from Kagame. Okay, so you realize that when it came to giving a hand to the Rwandese, Kagame was called back from school. He was abroad in school. I think he was in Kansas here, in the USA, or Leavenworth, somewhere in a military college. So Museveni had to call him back. He said, Rijema had advanced as a commander in the liberation of the Rwandese 1990s. Unfortunately, there was a disagreement about, I think, rank and position. So Rijema told the group that slept in Kabale, they slept in Kabale at a certain hotel when they were going to attack Rwanda. So in the middle of the night, the boys started like questioning themselves that, okay, now we have fought the Ugandan war. Now it is time for us to go liberate ourselves as Rwandese who were dispelled and displaced as refugees into Uganda. Now that we are going back home, who is going to be who in what office? Then Rujema was like, you guys, I don't want to hear that nonsense. It is irrelevant at this time. Let's go fight. The end shall justify the means of power allocation. The boys were like, hell no. It's not going to work like that. You are not going to use us and manipulate us like the Ugandan Musevenis who have been using us all that long time. It is now or never that you tell us who is going to become what. From that disagreement, that is how Rijema ends up being shot. So upon his death, Kagame had to come quickly back home and take over command. That is how Kagame, under those unfortunate Rijema circumstances, endeavors to go into the battle, and by God's luck or by his own military kind of skill, he ends up becoming the first president of the liberated Rwanda, 1994. Okay?
Yes.
So, you get to realize that these brain children had a guardian, call them a military foster father in Museveni. Okay? Having fostered them and groomed them militarily, that is one reason why we end up having a genocide in Rwanda. Okay? Because if the Kagames and the Rijemas did not have ambitions to go back and destabilize Rwanda under Habyarimana, probably the world would not have witnessed over 1 million point something people killed in the Rwanda genocide. You understand? Yes. So you get to see that we are tracing Museveni from his days of destabilizing the Idi Amin government, his involvement in clandestine operations and Obote. Then eventually he comes, Alinga Kajiko na Tabula. He comes and disorganizes all other governments that came after Amin and Obote, until when successfully he overpowered the Tito Okello Lutwa government and he takes over power 1985 February. So if we come up with a topic describing Museveni as the birther of political disorder, it is from that deep background that we come out to explain. Now, Museveni, as a man who calls himself as a revolutionary struggle is never static. It has no parking stage. Teziringa motoka za taxi mbu Luwero taxi enkadde taxi park empya. No, revolutionary oyina okuteekawo kapya. Actually, sometimes it is necessary to use warfare as a means of other political negotiation. Okay? But also, destabilizing and reconstructing society does not mean that society is not at war. After all, the absence of war in itself is not a justification that people are not at war. So, after military warfare, Museveni now embarks on economic warfare by stripping naked the Ugandan economy through a program he adopted from the imperial masters through World Bank then, a program that was designed to impoverish third world countries, including Uganda and the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. A program that was deliberately designed by World Bank to strip naked African states of their resources under what we came to understand as structural adjustment program. It basically was emphasizing that for you to get help and loans from World Bank and IMF, it was required of any African state to sell property of the state. That is how, ladies and gentlemen, we end up coming up with a program in the early 90s called privatization of national corporations, like Uganda Transport Company, the sale off of UCB, the sale off of Uganda Electricity Board, the sale off of Uganda Civil Aviation, the sale off of Produce Marketing, the sale off of Uganda Dairy Corporation, the sale off of Uganda Coffee Marketing Board, the sale off of all corporations, ebitongole byonna bitwali tuyina under the management of the state. It was a condition that if you were to get IMF and World Bank loans, you had to sell off your properties as a state so they can give you what they called the structural realignment, how they wanted things to go. So, Museveni having accumulated military capacity, now it was time for his group and henchmen to accumulate economic muscles. What do? They end up selling the corporations of Uganda to themselves. For example, Dairy Corporation was sold for less than $10. Ekitongole kyali kikola amata, from fresh milk to yogurt to muzigo to everything called dairy product. It was sold through a mafia fake investor in the names of Karanashani for less than $10, Mark.
Wow. Yes. I wish abantu batambuza message eno bannange mbadde mpuliriza. I'm listening. Oh my God.
Jinja becomes a ghost city or ghost town from being a prosperous manufacturing hub that was supposed to be as prosperous as Nakuru of Kenya, or even better. I'm telling you, in the days of Obote, for your parents to be working in Jinja, in those factories, Nightil, that was a role model kind of parent. It was a sign of success. You go there right now. Eh? All they are doing is growing sugar canes, and a lorry of sugar canes goes for less than 400,000. And what is sugar cane? It is a perennial crop. You need a whole year of commitment and starvation to realize sticks of sugar cane. And do you know that if you are to go into selling your sugar cane, you have to bribe your way into the factory? Your sugar cane could spend anywhere between a week and a month as you are waiting in the queue, or call it a line. So they create a crisis of access to the market to the extent that people become so frustrated, they end up saying, mumpe muze mumpa, mpoyo kubera wano, jagala kuddayo waka. Because togenda kutula wansi wa lole y'ebikajjo for a week, 2 weeks, ngate you have to bribe your way into being in the front of the line to sell something you have been, growing for the last 1 year, nga toyina income. So through privatization. That is how the Museveni regime comes up and breaks the structure and the fiber and our economic powerhouse, you know. So he comes from disorganizing societies and dispersing families through war. Now it is time for economic warfare. He has come, he has taken over. UCB Bank was sold through very dubious ways in a fake Malaysian company that was disguised as a buying company, only to end up having UCB for a price of bread in the hands of Salim Saleh and the late Chigundu. That is how, after they had made that deal to take over UCB, Salim Saleh and Chigundu, they go behind Chigundu's back and they impoverished him because they don't want a strong, prosperous, again, Muganda, who was likely to reconstruct the powerhouse of Buganda, because their plan was to deliberately come, break down the financial muscle of the central inhabitants of Uganda, which is mainly the Baganda. So come in central Buganda, kill them, make them run away, make them join you. Some will die in the war, some will survive. When we come out, let us sell property of Uganda, let us build on our economic empire. Since they are going to be poor, desperate, hungry, and dispersed, you know, let us start buying their properties called land. Now, Museveni, as a student of economics and political science from Dar es Salaam University, he studied very well the book called Karl Marx and Hegel. It basically tells you the design of how to accumulate wealth by dominating factors of production. What are factors of production? Human resource.
Land.
Which is basically the army, of course, management of the state and state infrastructure. All that is human resource. He got it for free. He got human resource for free. I'm telling you, there is nobody who joined the NRA under a payroll. You go and ask anybody who fought the war for those 5 years. How much was your salary from 1980 to 1985? Nothing. You had to serve under coercion or under artificial circumstances that were violent, that were designed and put in place by Museveni. There is nobody who was on a payroll in the bush warfare times. Nobody. Because it was time to break the organized setup of the state called Uganda, break the economy, start over and come up with their own structures. So Museveni had a plan to come up with his own political, military, and economic superstructure. That is why today, if they tell you that his men, his sycophants, and his former, they are the most wealthy and the most prominent landlords today, owning square miles of land, it is not to anybody's surprise. You understand? If you go to Zimbabwe, they will tell you that these people have acres, hectares of land in terms of square miles. You can drive on their farms. Museveni, Kutesa, all those Sedusas, they have farms whereby it is the equivalent of driving from Kampala to Entebbe. That is one man's farm. One. Oba wakamala ya Kutesa, no yingira ya General Mulala. No yingira ya General Mulala. So that means you could actually drive from Kampala going to Entebbe and back like 5 times, rotating around the farms of these men. Ask yourself, when they were coming into power or before power, how many of them owned even 5 acres of land? None. How did they get there? They broke the organized society of Ugandans, especially Buganda, they took over the economic powerhouse. They accumulated wealth. You know, they made the treasury of Uganda, Bank of Uganda, their own ATM. So by having access to money, that means you are able to buy land. Land is a factor of production. Human resource can only be motivated to becoming productive if you give it money, because everybody goes to work for a wage. How are you able to afford paying wages? By taking over the financial powerhouse of Uganda, called the money center, which is Bank of Uganda. All right. So another factor of production, what do you need to overtake those who were rich before you? You need to take over factories. Why? Because machine is part of the elements that are involved in our day-to-day production means, isn't it? But how do factories run? Factories need umeme to run. What do you do? Privatize umeme and sell it to your son and buy it. Easy, right? Right. So how do you continue being an economic powerhouse? Price the umeme on Uyaka for as much as you can please. How does that leave Ugandans? It leaves Ugandans as basically tenants in your estates where you have built massive, rentals. Make them go to work either through government offices or get work in your factories, or let them join the army as police or military, whatever it is. So all in all, you are making them become your donkeys. At the end of the day, you are the beneficiary. Because guess what? Every time we go to work, we have to pay for rent, right? You are paying rent in most of the rentals which belong to them. So that means you are doing what we call acceleration of social progress of a certain group. Okay? So indirectly, you are being enslaved without even realizing it, because you are going to work for them. They pay you minimal survival kind of living, which is called a salary or wage. You come into the bank, which they have taken over. Remember, they have taken over UCB. So they have the financial muscle to lend to you at an interest rate. Meaning that while these people are sipping champagne and wine, or even snoring in their beds, there is somebody slaving for them because you took a loan. You are trying to run away from their rentals to go buy your own land. Remember, they already own chunks of land, because fast forward, what they did was to acquire capital, buy off the impoverished societies of Buganda and elsewhere. So they became landlords, having accumulated money by having Bank of Uganda under their armpits. So as you are trying to run away from being tired of being a tenant in their own estates, you are going to buy land from their own companies. That is how Jovial Saleh ends up becoming a partner of property master. Okay? Property master under Kasulu. Kasulu had to die so that they could consolidate their real estate place. Do you remember somebody called Property Master?
Yeah, I remember him. What happened to him?
What happened to Chigun?
Yafa.
So when you hear all these real estate companies that started booming, it was after the primitive accumulation of capital, something that Karl Marx teaches you, in his book, which Museveni read in university. So Museveni came out with two tools. Actually, Museveni, for him, the only capital he came with from Dar es Salaam and his days of school was learning how to use the gun, learning how to be a commander, and learning how to be an architecture or designer of the political disorder, so he could take over, so he could find a place in the social class that otherwise would have been impossible, because he was not born in any kind of kingship. He was not a prince. So Museveni had to find his way. He had to break into social class. On the street these days, we call it okusamba akaji. So Museveni engeri gyeyali nga simulangira we Bunyolo Busoga oba Buganda oba Tooro, yali musajja mukopi, abazadde nga baavu n'abaavu nga babageya, baavu bannaabwe baali babageya, kumanya baali baavu. Okay, so Museveni n'agamba nkoze ntyo okuyimusa abantu bange nti tulina okusamba akaji. That is how yagenda na convincing barefugee abalala nga Bakagame abaali eyo side ze Tooro eyo mu refugee camp oba bagiyita Nyakibaalo oba bagiyita biki, n'abajjayo Babijema n'abajjayo n'abateeka mu law n'abagamba mwe mbabuulire tetugenda kuwangalira mu nnaku wano na kubeera barefugee bwe tulina okusamba akaji. Kasita tusamba akaji kana ka gavumenti ya Kitokero Lutwa ne tukijjako, nze mbalayirira nammwe ngenda bakwatisaako tugende tusamba akaji kewamwe muddeyo mu nsi yammwe gye baabagobamu, kubanga Bakagame bazadde baabwe baali babafuumuula e Rwanda mu 1905 ne baddukira Uganda. Kati awo Balijema ne Kagame awo we bajja lo ne bagamba ne bankubadde tetuli Bannayuganda, ono Guy kasita atusuubiza ati kasita tumusambirako akaji naye ajja tukwata ku mukono tugende Rwanda tusambe na kali akaji naffe tubeerewo tulye ng'abaami. Okay, so that is how we end up having RPF, Rwanda Patriotic Army, which is a break off. It is like the annex engeri gye tulina nga Micho campus, Micho Hall, ne mubeera in a Micho annex. So Rwanda is basically the annex of UPDF. That is why Museveni up to now, Museveni when he's introducing Kagame before the Queen, Muchogam, Yamugamba, Your Majesty, there is also here a very, very, very good boy here, very good boy called Paulo. Paulo, stand up so Your Majesty can see you. Kubanga teri muntu asobola okukuza nga kusangula minyira n'okula n'ovubuka n'obeera musajja envuumuulo nga Mark. Ye aba kyakulabira mu kifaananyi kiringo kyayambala nappi. Kitegeeza ago ge mazalawo agaliwo wakati wa Kagame ne Museveni. Kagame ayagala kulagako Museveni nti munsobize wakola ne management y'enfu nze nakifotokopingamu n'ekifuula beta. Ate nange nina okwetaaya, I have my own autonomy. Museveni tayagala kukkiriza
Abaganda bagamba nti enjovu ebbiri we zirwanira obusubi bwe bukafiiramu kaakati Bannayuganda n'Abannarwanda they are the ones suffering the consequences of these two guys' egos.
Exactly, but what I'm telling you that Kagame and Museveni, they read from the same script. Okay? Kakati Bannayuganda bonna bakolera Museveni. Alinga yabakwata obwongo, he captured their minds in somewhat what looks as a true formula. Okay? Banga Museveni bonna bamwetoolodde olowooza lwaki bamutya okumwesimbako n'okumucriticizing. It is like omuntu okugamba there is a formula to finding the area of a circle. Not so? Oli averi nakugamba uliriza nze ndi musomesa manyi okubala. I can help you guys to find the area of a circle. Ne bamubuuza Mzee Museveni, what is the area of the circle? What we are going to do is area of a circle is equal to pi r squared. But what Museveni does, him, ng'omuntu eyeyagaliza, tababuulira number ki, factor ki, that is going to define the radius. Abalekera ne mumanyako the figure for the pi, which is 3.43. Size ya radius tagibabuulira. That is why without Museveni, there is no anything called NRA or NRM. That is why during the Bush War, when the days were hard and people seemed not to know what to do next, Salim Saleh kept telling the forces that Subiri, Vumilia, Mzee anapanga. because they did not have the fact of that number that goes into the R complete the formula of area of the circle, which is the M7 establishment is the circle. The area is defined by pi, which is called the army, times R, which is a secret of M7 squared. So everybody working and around abo bonna beswanta nti baagala kujjako Museveni batwale obuyinza from within that circle abo batumukunde basajjusa. That is why they end up falling in his hands. Besigye himself oddukira otya mu Gomez paka South Africa ate omuzimu gwe gumu ne gukomyawo e Uganda n'obeerawo emyaka 2 ng'owuddisa abantu agenda gwe yasooka okugenda ye n'omuleka mu ntebe n'okomawo n'omwesimbako myaka 2 tanaba kugenda. Kati bw'oba omanyi nti akalulu tekagenda mujjako emirundi ena wali okola ki? Why were you wasting your time? Now you are like kakati tugenda mu plan B, then you were plan B. Why didn't you realize that after failing the first time or the second time? So I'm telling you people, these people, whatever they are doing, this what you see as political gimmicks, including the internal politics within NRM, the fake opposition that has been, ebintu bino byonna byali biteekateeka. You understand? In the end, some people are meant to benefit from the center stage of wielding power. That is those who run the executive, legislature, and the judiciary, while some of their members will be on the second 11 bench. Do not be fooled by any ex-combatant who was in the Bush War that they are going to do any better than Museveni himself. Why? Because you only can write an exam and answer the question paper in accordance with the literature that your teacher gave you. If your teacher gave you fake notes, you are going to write in your name fake answers, which equals failure. Museveni alinga bano abaana abagezi abeefuulanga mukwano gwo mu class n'omugamba gundi physics antawaanya n'onzikiriza ndabe ku lupapula nagamba tewali mutawaana kyali wange sooka ompeereza akabalagala awo n'omusimbaza akabalagala n'enkya taamu yonna ng'omuliisa kabalagala bitumbuuwa bindaazi naye gayi mutuuka mu pepa asooka n'awandika peegi esooka n'agiwandika mu penso nga bifu n'okopa ebyo waba wabula eddakiika 3 to the end of the exam n'alyoka awandika answer entuufu. That is how Museveni yasooka n'atutambuliza mu one party system for 10 years as he was building capacity. Do you know taking control of the economy, the army, and everything called running a state for 10 years nga tewali avuganya? Kibanga ogamba tugenda mu misinde, tugenda okudduka from Kampala Road to Jinja Road. Naye bakompitita bona osooka obagamba musooke muleke nze ngenda kusooka nziruke for 10 minutes then namwe mutandike. You are free to win the medal if you can, if you get to the finishing line before me. That is what he did. Political manipulation using propaganda and deception as one of the tools. But he did not stop at that. He has always embarked on the military power of the powers that be to sustain his livelihood and stay in power. That is why Museveni is not shy of telling it to you in your face that he cannot go by a mere paper. He did not come by the paper. He will not go by the paper called ballot. So he believes. I'm not putting my man on that because I know for sure if we can come up with a perfect plan as Ugandans, it is possible. But in his own belief, he has never believed in civic transition of power. Nada, nothing. Never, ever. It's not in his mind. It's not going to come in his mind at the age of 75 or 80. he knows that ye akajiya kasambisa mundu AK-47, perhaps he's very sure that it is easier for him to go by the bullet than ballot. But basing on that background, mbadde ngezaako baggula amaaso such that, ladies and gentlemen, you can understand the architecture behind the political disorder in Uganda. Bino byonna bye mulaba ebiri mu internal fights mu NRM primaries. Museveni will let you fight. He will give you a fake disorganized system such that at the end of the day you go back to him crying like babies. Winners and losers at the end of the day are meant to go before the Godfather, the initiator of the concept in Museveni, such that they can seek the redress of the chaos. Nakugambe Museveni alinga omwana omugezi yefula mukwanoko nakukopesa answer mu exam nga wandise mu pencil gwe no submitting olupapula ye n'abiza mu pen ye n'ayitawo. That is what he did to the parliamentarians. He helped them with money or bribed his way into Kisanja extension, age limit lifting. So while the MPs were deceived to believe that if they help him to extend Kisanja and also lift the age limit, they are also going to be helped with an extra 2 years of a prolonged stay in parliament, which turned out otherwise. Now they are suffering the consequence of being duped by Museveni. That is why you are seeing that in the primaries, most sitting ministers and MPs are losing to either opposition or new entrants in the power contestation within NRM itself. So what we are seeing right now as the chaos brewing within NRM, it is just a tip of an iceberg of a very big mountain under the deliberate construct of Museveni to prolong his stay and build a Museveni empire the way he likes it, using the bricks and cement of violence, deception, political and economic exploitation, and social reverse engineering of solid societies of Uganda. When Komie Mark for today, teaching Ugandans about why Museveni is the birther of political disorder. Njakuja nyongereko some other time, kama nga yagadde, naye mbagamba ensolo kusiko kweri, mulemereko, we deserve a better Uganda. Now that Museveni has been in power long enough like this, it has given us an opportunity to study the X-ray image. We have the X-ray image of what informs his design and concept, and now we know how to demolish that construct that has sustained him in power. How are we going to demolish it? It is by first political and social consciousness building in our people, what we call each one teach one, something we have been doing for a while. It is through demanding to participate in what I call civic activism. That is, let people learn that it is very paramount and it is their duty to practice and participate in their civic duties of universal electoral processes, something you comrades have done so very well, the extent that I have never seen in the last so many years I've lived, the youth getting involved in the political dispensation of our country, the way you comrades have helped others on the ground, far and away from home, to mobilize and get the youth involved. I salute you, everybody. Thank you for your support. People power, our power. Kabonero umbrella, tewali kuzikiza. Thank you very much, Comrade Mark.
Thank you so much, Rogers Asimwe. Until we meet next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.